A few weeks ago, we began the topic of holy time. We covered the manner in which God established holy time, and then we focused on His instruction of the need to have an assembly during each day that He has appointed as holy time, weekly Sabbath, the annual Sabbaths as well. He expects His elect to honor and respect the holy time that He's given them and use the guidance from His Word to determine the structure of His commanded holy convocation or assembly. As we covered last time, the initial holy time was created on the seventh day during the creation of the first week, which is recorded in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. Be turning over to chapter 1 at this time. For 6 days, God took direct action with the physical creation, closing out the sixth day by making man. We read here in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them." And then let's skip down to verse 31. "Then God saw everything that He had made during that physical hands-on 6 days, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day." Now, immediately after creating man on the sixth day, God continued the first week by doing something different on the seventh day. Note, continuing on in chapter 2, verse 1, "Thus the heavens and the earth, and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended His work, which He had done. And He," it says, "rested on the seventh day from all His work, which He had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it He rested from all His work, which God had created and made." We find here 3 times in these 2 verses, God stresses that He ceased doing what He had done for 6 days. God set the example of resting from the physical labors required on the previous days of the week. The holy time of the seventh day was created in order to provide man a much-needed pause from the world and the physical orientation of this world. The day of rest, as Sabbath indicates, includes ceasing from mental labor as well as physical work. It is a cessation of labor. Holy time, again, we covered last time, begins at the going down of the sun, at sunset, and it ends at sunset on the following day. Only a small part of that time, that holy time, is spent in the assembly that God commands His people. So the question for us is, how should we conduct ourselves when we're not in assembly with others during the holy time that God has established? The first thing we need to do is to review, back in Exodus chapter 20, what God specifies for us in the fourth commandment. We need to keep this foremost in mind, because here we have the definition of the fourth commandment. "Remember," verse 8, Exodus 20, "remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." So keeping it holy is of paramount importance. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work. Pretty specific. No work. And then he goes on to say, "You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your," the Tanakh goes on, "your male or female slave, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, the term used here in this fourth commandment, within your gates, very important term. It establishes ownership and or authority over every person or thing in a defined area, within a gate. That is, whatever is enclosed within a particular area. God commanded all Israelites to observe holy time and to make certain that they and every life, because he includes here your cattle, every life in that area under their control must rest from the normal labor practiced during the other 6 days of the week. That's what God specifies here in the fourth commandment. So we find that the fourth commandment is very, very strict in the letter, because he says here clearly, do no work during holy time. However, if we go back to Exodus chapter 12, where God gives Moses instruction to give to Israel, in this instruction regarding holy time that takes place on the first and the seventh days of unleavened bread, God makes a clarification to this no work. Here in verse 16, I'll read from the New American Standard Translation. And on the first day you shall have a holy assembly, and another holy assembly on the seventh day. No work at all shall be done on them, note, except what must be eaten by every person. That alone may be prepared by you. So God specifies here in Exodus 12 that they were, on holy time, allowed to prepare themselves something to eat. The exception, the Day of Atonement. And he specifies the prohibition there. Jesus also pointed out other exceptions allowed by God to the no-work stipulation of the fourth commandment. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 1. It says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Your disciples are not doing what is lawful. Now, the Pharisees pointed out that the disciples were not being obedient to one of the 39 types of work forbidden on the Sabbath as defined in the traditions of the rabbis. That's what they were pointing out. There were 39 things. Oh, you can't harvest, you can't thresh, you can't, all kinds of things, because if you did that, as far as they were concerned, that is work. That is labor. You can't do it. So plucking a few handsful of grain, you are reaping the crop. Okay, so you are working according to them. It's not what God says, but that's what the rabbis came up with. Going on in verse 3, but he, Jesus, said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. And so Jesus immediately goes to this lawful issue. What you say is not lawful. Well, let me tell you about David. David did something that was not lawful. The Pharisees were upset that the disciples had ignored their long-standing decree a decree that their rabbis made that prohibited picking grain on the Sabbath in order to satisfy hunger. Jesus reminds them that when David and his men were hungry, they satisfied their hunger with bread that God Almighty had decreed belonged solely to the priests. In fact, let's go back to 1 Samuel chapter 21. Hold your place. We're going to come back to Matthew 12. But here in 1 Samuel chapter 21 and in verse 3. I'll read this from the New International. Now then, what do you have on hand? David had come to the priest, the high priest at that time. What do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread. That means holy bread. Here, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. They cannot be ritually unclean in order to eat something holy, is what the priest is saying. David replied, indeed, women have been kept from us as usual whenever I set out. The men's things are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence, that is the showbread, that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away, or possibly on that day when it was taken away. Now, nowhere in all of Scripture was David ever condemned for eating the holy bread. You don't find it anywhere. There's no condemnation. You can continue reading here in chapter 21 of 1 Samuel. No condemnation for what David did. Additionally, it's possible that Jesus used this particular example because the event may have occurred on the holy time of the Sabbath, shortly after the week-old bread in the holy place had been replaced by new bread. Therefore, Jesus was emphasizing that God never condemned any man for satisfying a need on holy time. So, neither should the Pharisees condemn Jesus' disciples for satisfying a need. God didn't, neither should they. Both dealing, especially with the 1 Samuel 21, we're dealing with holy bread. We're dealing with holy time back in Matthew chapter 12. But it's holy, but there are some exceptions to the strictness. Now, we go back to Matthew 12, verse 5. After telling them about, well, you say it's not lawful. Well, David did something not lawful. And then he goes on to say, or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath, that is in the Torah, that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Jesus pointed out that the priests serving at the tabernacle and later the temple did not obey the strict prohibition against doing any work on the Sabbath. The reason they worked, the reason the priesthood was involved in sacrifices and washings and various rituals was because God commanded them to work. He commanded them on the Sabbath to slaughter animals, to butcher those animals, to roast them, to boil them, to fry them, to bake bread. All of that He instructed them to do on the Sabbath day. Over in Leviticus chapter 24. Leviticus 24, verse 5. Leviticus 24:5, beginning in verse 5, Tanakh translates, you shall take choice flour, bake of it 12 loaves, 2/10 of a measure for each loaf. Place them on the pure table before the Lord, that is the showbread table, made of gold. Place it before the Lord in 2 rows, 6 to a row. With each row you shall place pure frankincense, which is to be a token offering for the bread, as an offering by fire to the Lord. He shall arrange them before the Lord regularly, note this, every Sabbath day. So this bread had to be baked on the Sabbath and had to be placed on the table on the Sabbath. It is a commitment for all time on the part of the Israelites. They shall belong, that is, those loaves, shall belong to Aaron and his sons, who shall eat them in the sacred precinct, for they are his as most holy things from the Lord's offerings by fire, a due for all time. So again, it was established that all of the showbread belonged to the priest. They were the only ones who could eat it. Once it was taken off the showbread table, it was theirs. And yet David ate some. Now, when Jesus says in verse 5 of Matthew 12, or have you not read that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Let's go to Numbers chapter 28. And let's take note of some of the things that were required of the priesthood. The priests were commanded to offer 2 sacrifices daily, 7 days a week. Here in verse 1 of Numbers 28, now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel, and say to them, My offering, my food for my offerings made by fire is a sweet aroma to me. You shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time. In other words, when I tell you to do it, that's when it needs to be done. Don't try to juggle it around to suit your fancy. And you shall say to them, This is the offering made by fire, which you shall offer to the Lord. 2 male lambs in their first year without blemish, day by day, that is, day after day, as a regular burnt offering, that is, without ceasing. It's continual. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, the other lamb you shall offer in the evening. And 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour is a grain offering mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil. It is a regular burnt offering, which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. And its drink offering shall be 1/4 of a hin for each lamb. And in a holy place you shall pour out the drink to the Lord as an offering. The other lamb you shall offer in the evening. As the morning grain offering and its drink offering, you shall offer it as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord. Now, in addition to the 2 lambs, the 2 sacrifices of the lambs that were commanded every day of the week, God commanded the priest to go ahead and offer even another special offering on the Sabbath itself, on the 7th day. Note going on in verse 9, and on the Sabbath day, 2 lambs in their first year without blemish, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering, mixed with oil with its drink offering. This is the burnt offering for every Sabbath, besides or in addition to the regular burnt offering with its drink offering that you offer on all the other 6 days of the week. Now, God also commanded a new moon sacrifice that always fell on the holy time of the Feast of Trumpets. And sometimes a new moon will fall on a Sabbath, a weekly Sabbath. And when that happens, there is more work that's added to what the priest must do on the weekly Sabbath. Note here in verse 11, at the beginnings of your months, you shall present a burnt offering to the Lord, 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 lambs in their first year without blemish. So that's even more work. God also required, and we won't do it, we could go on down here, verses 16 through the next chapter, and God gives a list of all of the special sacrifices required on the holy time of the 7 annual Sabbaths, as well as the normal. Again, the 2 lambs every day, the Sabbath, all of that had to be done. And some of the annual festivals fall on the Sabbath. So when you have first day of When you have trumpets fall on the Sabbath, the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles falls on the Sabbath, the last great day falls on the Sabbath. You've got to do everything, plus all of those, all of that on the Sabbath. Mark's account. Let's go back now to Mark chapter 2. Mark's account that parallels the passage in Matthew chapter 12 includes an important reminder that's not included in what Matthew records, and that's the fact that God made the seventh day holy for the benefit of man. It was for man's benefit that God gave that seventh day, because everything was created, it was finished on the sixth day. Everything that He'd made was good, but He added a day. He added the day for man, and it's for man's benefit. Otherwise, we'd have a calendar with 6-day weeks. But no, God added a seventh day. Here in verse 27, Mark 2, and He, Jesus, said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. That's true. Man was made on the sixth day. The Sabbath was made on the seventh day. The Sabbath followed. Therefore, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. He is the master of the Sabbath. Jesus emphasizes here that the Sabbath was created after man for man, to serve the needs of man. This relationship of the Sabbath to man is similar to the relationship of woman to man. Woman was made after man for man. Paul deals with it a couple of times in his church epistles. God makes clear that in the husband-wife relationship, the man is to love, to honor, to respect the woman. Just because the woman was made for man does not give man the right to abuse her. She is not his to abuse. And in the same way, man is to honor and to show respect to the holy time of the Sabbath. Man has no right to abuse holy time. It was given to him for a godly purpose. Man is not to treat it in a disrespectful manner. Jesus Christ never, during the time that He was in the flesh, carrying out His ministry in the flesh, He never challenged the focus of the fourth commandment. However, in dealing with the Pharisees' merciless reasoning in how the Sabbath should be observed, Jesus referred to two examples to show that despite the strictness of the letter of His decrees, God was merciful and provided exceptions to the strictness of the letter of the law. But only when there was a legitimate need. That's important to keep in mind, the need. Physical man needs to rest. He needs to, especially after laboring for 6 days in this dog-eat-dog world under the influence of Satan the devil. He needs a rest from that. Man needs that. Man needs to stay focused on the purpose of this physical life. This isn't all there is. This is just the first step into something beyond the scope of our comprehension at this time. Man needs to have time to be focused on the purpose of life. To do so, he needs to use the holy time God gives him in order to build his relationship with God by praying and studying and meditating more during that holy time than on the other 6 days of the week when he must labor. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. God also includes that in the fourth commandment. You do that. So he doesn't have quite the amount of time the other 6 days that he has on the seventh. Man needs this extra spiritual boost that holy time provides to keep him spiritually oriented for the next 6 days that he will again be required to labor in this world cut off from God. Now, in addition to his spiritual needs, because man is physical, he also has physical needs in addition to the need for rest. Yes, physical rest is very important. Nice to rest from that. But rest from the mental is also wonderful. Jesus pointed out in the example in Matthew chapter 12, as well as the parallel in Mark chapter 2, that physical hunger is what prompted his disciples to pick enough kernels of grain in order to satisfy that hunger. It was a need that they had. Other physical needs are drink, shelter, clothing, to be cooled when it's hot, to be warmed when it's cold. There are other needs as well, but those are something that we all need. We need those. Those with young children have the need to satisfy the needs of their children. Those with health problems have needs that those who are in good health simply don't need. Man is allowed to satisfy his physical needs on holy time so that he is not distracted by discomfort. You know how it is. If you get hungry, it's hard to think about anything but, boy, I sure would like to get something to eat. I'm starving, and yet you can't concentrate. And the same if it's so cold, your teeth are chattering. You can't concentrate. If you're so hot, you're about to pass out. You can't concentrate. Needs, when we have a need, it needs to be satisfied so that we can once again get our bearings. If man's needs are satisfied, he can stay mentally focused and make the best use of the holy time. The holy time quickly comes and it quickly goes. It's not here long. Just one day, and it's amazing how quickly one day can pass. However, despite being able to satisfy his needs, man must not think that he has a right to satisfy his wants. But there are all too many who try to somehow equate wants to needs. Now, in that regard, Jesus taught, let's go back to John chapter 5, Jesus taught the disciples in word and by example how to correctly observe holy time. Then he gave his disciples the opportunity to decide what their individual needs were on the Sabbath, after showing them through his life and letting them know by his teaching. Let's review some of the things that Jesus did during the holy time of the Sabbath, beginning here in verse 1 of John 5. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Now, a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. It's a long time to have a physical situation like that, a physical problem. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed, and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. Jesus healed the man, and in effect, He told this man to use the remainder of the holy time of the Sabbath, that particular Sabbath day, in a profitable manner. Don't sit around here. Don't wait around. Go, get up, walk, do what you should do on the Sabbath, something you haven't been able to do, really, for the last 38 years. There was no need for the man to sit on his mat, because that's what the bed was. It was just a small mat that you rolled up. But there's no need for him to sit on that mat until the sun went down before he could move from that place. By doing what he did, Jesus shows us that there is more to the Sabbath than simply avoiding labor. There's something more that we're to do than just avoid work. We're not to become a slave to the Sabbath, which is why many of the Jews, or what many of the Jews of that day had done. They had become slaves, as the account goes on to show here. Verse 10, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed. What do you think you're doing?" He, the man who was healed, answered them, "He who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" Then they asked him, "Well, who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" We find here that the religious leaders of the Jews of that day insisted that their tradition, again, one of the other 39 points of work that should be avoided so that you don't break the Sabbath, they insisted that their tradition of not picking up anything over a certain weight on the Sabbath had been broken. And they demanded to know the identity of the one who had been so brash that he dismissed their righteous restriction. That was righteous, what had been determined, those 39 points. And because that restriction was broken, the Sabbath itself was transgressed. That was the way they viewed it. Verse 13, but the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." Now, had the man done what the religious leaders would have had him do, he would never have assembled with others in the courtyard of the temple. But notice, that's where Jesus found him. Jesus found him in the temple. So when he took up his bed and walked, he went and put his bed up, and then he went to the temple. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to assemble on the Sabbath day. But the religious leaders, if he had done what they wanted, he had been sitting there in the courtyard. Not in the courtyard. He would have been somewhere else. He would have still been sitting on his mat by the pool in Bethesda, because he wasn't even allowed to pick it up because it was too heavy according to their regulations. Common sense dictated that once healed, the man should have taken up his belongings and spent the remainder of that Sabbath as others who worship God. In that way, the Sabbath served the needs of the man. However, the Jewish religious leaders believed that the man was to be bound by immobility until the Sabbath ended. You stay right there. You have a flat tire, well, you're going to have to wait till the sun goes down before you jack that car up and change the tire. That would be, equivalent today. That's utter stupidity. But that is what the religious leaders would have demanded. The religious leaders, again, their idea, and what you can glean from right here, is that man was made to serve the Sabbath rather than the Sabbath made to serve the man, which we already read in Mark 2:27. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. They had it backward. Verse 15, the man departed and told the Jews, this is after Jesus found him at the temple, he told the Jews it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason, because Jesus had healed this man and told him to pick something up and break one of their righteous restrictions as far as the Sabbath was concerned, pick up something that was too heavy according to their restrictions. Because of this, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him, to murder him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. Therefore, the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Now we know from what we read throughout the Bible, but one specific verse in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, is the fact that Jesus never sinned. He never said he was without sin. And therefore, he never transgressed the holy time of the Sabbath. Not once in all of his life. The Greek word that's translated broke here actually means loosened. The Jews were upset because Jesus loosened the restrictive lifting and carrying tradition that they considered necessary in order to properly observe the Sabbath. Not only had he broke the Sabbath, that is as far as the way they defined it, not the way God defines breaking the Sabbath, the way they defined it. The religious leaders of the Jews would not let go of their hostility toward Jesus. At the next Feast of Tabernacles, let's turn over to John chapter 7. At the next Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus again came to Jerusalem, and he further elaborated at that time on Sabbath observance. Sabbath observance is very important to Jesus Christ. Verse 21, John 7. Jesus answered and said to them, I did one work when I was in Jerusalem previously, and you all marvel. Moses, therefore, gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. That is, from the time God gave it as a sign of the covenant that he made with Abraham. Moses was simply the one who wrote it down. But that circumcision requirement goes back to the time of Abraham. That's what he's saying here. So, Moses gave you circumcision, that's recorded in the Torah, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? God required all of Abraham's male descendants to be circumcised on the 8th day. The Jews interpreted that command to be an exception to the strictness of the letter of the 4th commandment. That's the way they interpreted it. They viewed circumcision to be equal to the duties that God had assigned and commanded the priest to perform on the Sabbath day, because they're slicing and dicing these animals and butchering these animals. And so what's the difference in cutting a little piece of flesh on a human being? That was the way that the Jews perceived it. Now, Jesus didn't disagree with their interpretation of the circumcision command, but he pointed out here that the work that they did on the body of a male baby on the 8th day actually required more physical labor than the healing he performed by simply issuing a command. They couldn't see it. Now, there were other instances of Jesus relieving suffering on the Sabbath. Back in Luke chapter 13. Luke 13 and in verse 10. Now, he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years. Not 38, 20 years shorter, but still 18 years is a long time. So 18 years for her, 38 for the man at Bethesda. And was bent over and could in no way raise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. That's all he said. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue, one of the religious Jews, probably a Pharisee, answered with indignation because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he, the synagogue leader, said to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them and not on the Sabbath day." The Lord then answered him and said, "Hypocrite! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, think of it, for 18 years be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath?" And when he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame. And all the multitude rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. We find here that this woman had a need. She had a legitimate need, and Jesus had the ability to provide for that need. And he did it on the Sabbath. After closing his response, let's go back to Matthew chapter 12. After closing his response to the Pharisees, after they challenged him about his disciples plucking and eating grain on the Sabbath, Jesus then, immediately after that, went into the synagogues. It was still the Sabbath day. So we'll pick up the story here in verse 10. Matthew 12:10. "And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand, and they," once again, the Pharisees, "asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him." Well, obviously, one of the 39 points of labor that should not be done is healing someone. That should not be done. That was the reason they were upset. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Because according to one of those 39 points, no, it's not. And so if he said, yes, it is lawful, it would be going against their tradition. Then he said to them, he didn't answer them straight out, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." If you can do good to an animal, you can surely do good to a human being. Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Jesus shows us that when a situation arises where a legitimate need exists, in this case, suffering from a health issue, something that is chronic, and we have the ability to help. If there's some way we can remedy that need, then we should by all means take action. Not that we are called to heal anybody as far as any physical healing. But if there's a need, someone needs some healing emotionally or whatever, we have, from this example, the right to help them with that need, even if it is on the Sabbath. Now, a similar event took place at another time on the Sabbath in Luke chapter 14. In Luke 14, verse 1, "Now it happened as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath." Jesus went out to eat that day. No, I'm just, people. Okay, anyway, he went into the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread, that they watched him closely when that happened. "And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy," or as the New Living Translation brings out the meaning of dropsy, is whose arms and legs were swollen. Because dropsy is retention, in your body, a fluid retention. And so this individual was in that condition. "And Jesus answering spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" This is what he posed the question this time. But they kept silent. Well, if they said yes, then one of the 39 points of work you can't be done, now they're going to be in serious trouble. So no, they're not going to say anything. They kept silent. He took him and healed him and let him go. Then he answered them, saying, Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that's fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Now, in the previous event, in Matthew chapter 12, the Pharisees asked Jesus the question. Here, in Luke 14, Jesus poses the question to them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? By repetition, Jesus emphasizes that the Sabbath is also a time when we should be aware of the needs of others and not be totally focused on ourselves. This day is for me and me alone to get close to God. Everybody else stay out of my way. This is my day with God. Well, that's true. It is our day. But we cannot exclude others. Jesus did not. Now, in both of these events, Jesus draws attention to an ordinance that God gave to ancient Israel, found in Deuteronomy chapter 22. In Deuteronomy 22 and verse 4, You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fall down along the road and hide yourself from them. You shall surely help him lift them up again. That was the statute, the regulation, the ordinance that God gave. Since God does not, at this point, qualify this practice to be done only on days other than the Sabbath. He doesn't say, except for the Sabbath or another annual holy day, you are to do this. He gives no exceptions here. He says, if you see this happen, you see a need, then you do it. And because of this, the Jews read it. They saw no reason why they couldn't labor on the Sabbath to help an animal in distress because, the Torah says I can do it. So what's the problem with helping a man? That they didn't understand. Jesus clarified it. But again, you can get a donkey or not. Now that's work. Some of you know how big some of those animals can be. And to help get them out, that's not going to be something you do in a couple of seconds. It's going to take it may take an hour or more, depending on whether the tools necessary in order to get the animal out are anywhere around. There's going to be some digging or whatever, rope, and anyway. But again, God says you can help. And yet God's command is very emphatic regarding the work issue on holy time. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 35. Exodus 35 and in verse 2. Verse 1, Moses gathered all the children of Israel together. There's something that is about to transpire beginning here in this chapter. Verse 2, Work shall be done, Moses told them, for 6 days. But on the 7th day shall be a holy day for you, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings on the Sabbath day. Now, understand, Moses is giving a preface to instruction that is about to follow. And he is reminding these people regarding that instruction. And when he says, you shall kindle no fire, this fire had to do with smelting and of breaking down and casting metals. Because he was reminding those who would be making the various implements for the tabernacle that their work was not so important that they could be excluded from the requirement of the fourth commandment. And we're going to be working on the tabernacle. We need to get this done as quickly as possible. Therefore, it's got to be 24/7. No, Moses said, it's not. This is a holy project. This is an important project, but you have no right to transgress the time of the fourth commandment. Because he goes on here in verse 10, all who are gifted artisans among you shall come and make all that the Lord has commanded. The tabernacle, its tent, its covering, its clasps, its boards, its bars, its pillars, its sockets, the ark and its poles and the mercy seat, the veil of the covering, the table and its poles, all its utensils and the showbread, also the lampstand for the light, its utensils, its lamps and the oil for the light, the incense altar, its poles, the anointing oil. I mean, he goes on and on. All of these things had to be made. And so when he says, you shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings, he's talking to this group of artisans, those who were gifted, no doubt had learned these various crafts and trades in Egypt, and now they were going to be responsible for producing the implements for the tabernacle and for making the hangings and so forth and so on. And so that's what this was all about. There's nothing wrong if we're cold on the Sabbath and the electricity goes out, and we're freezing to death. Yes, we could kindle some coals. That's a need. So we don't freeze to death, or so we're not so uncomfortable that we're just sitting there chattering all day long and not getting any use out of the Sabbath, the time that God's given us. In Numbers chapter 15, we have another situation about the seriousness of no work. Numbers 15, verse 32. Now, while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. They put him under guard because it had not been explained what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death. No discussion. There was no exception. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as the Lord commanded Moses, all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. Gathering firewood on the Sabbath was doing work when no legitimate need existed. Now, possibly he was gathering sticks or firewood in order to have everything ready for Sunday, when he was going to start up a furnace in order to melt down some metals for working on the tabernacle. We're not told. It doesn't give us any more background than this. What he did, though, was not a need. What he did was what he wanted to do. And so God said he has to be put to death. As we've seen from examples of Jesus' teaching concerning Sabbath observance, work is not an absolute prohibition on the Sabbath. It's not absolute. Priests did phenomenal amounts of work. However, any labor expended on holy time must be weighed against the need. When we have an urgent need for our well-being on the Sabbath, there may be things we could do on the Sabbath that would be considered work, but would be legitimate exceptions based upon the examples that we have from Scripture. God never, ever intended the Sabbath to be a day when all we do is worry about whether we can or can't do something. In the early days, at least when I first came into contact with God's people and the church, that was one of the big things. Can I do this, or should I not do that, or what can or what I can't do? And people were asking a lot of those questions. Well, can I do this, or can I do that? And is it okay to brush my teeth on the Sabbath? That's work. There are all kinds of things that people wonder. I don't see a lot of people asking, can I do this? People just do it. Oh, let's go on a 20-mile bike ride on the Sabbath. And it's okay because we're enjoying God's creation. I don't have to answer to God for that kind of reasoning. The individual who does it would have to. Can I, there are people who, it's a playoffs. I really need to know how the game turns out, and so I got to watch this game. This is a need I have. No, it's not. It is not a need. Oh, I really need to keep the TV on in case there's some emergency broadcast of something that happens in the world. There may be, this may be the time. Today may be the day when the trigger is pulled and all of the events of Revelation begin to unfold. And I need to know. No, you don't. No, you don't. God tells us there's a 45-day buffer zone there. You don't have to worry about it. Anyway, but there are people, well, I've got to do this. And do you really? Is it really a need? Is it really a need? People don't remember once something is done. Nobody remembers. I mean, there are people like Bob Costas that remember everything that happened in baseball, and there are others who remember things that happen in other sports. But, generally, I have no clue who played in the World Series last year. But then I don't have any clue since about 1961 who played in the World Series, because that was when baseball came to an end. After that, it was money-grubbing, people getting into the game, and I don't care for it. I love the game, but I get tired of druggies and whatever. People are already, NFL, NBA, they're felons. I mean, give me a break. Anyway, I don't want to get off on this. I'm going to lose too much time. Anyway, we don't need to watch TV on the Sabbath. People are like, well, it's okay to watch. Why? I need to watch the news. Why? We want to come out of this world on the Sabbath, on this holy time. We don't want to labor with what is so important in this world. Let's get out of it. We can go without hearing the news for a day. It really isn't going to make any difference whatsoever whether we know or whether we don't know. It would be nice to know if a tornado is coming, but we don't have to worry about it here. People out there in internet land, some of them have to worry about those things, but, you can watch. There are things that could be done. Depends on your need. We don't need certain things. We certainly don't need to watch movies, watch baseball, football, whatever on the Sabbath. Hockey, if there are any Canadians around. We don't need to watch those things. We only have a little bit of holy time in a week. Just a little bit. Every example of Jesus Christ concerning the Sabbath deals with the intent and purpose of holy time, not on the things that are prohibited. The Sabbath is a day to be used to spend more time communing with God and focusing on His plan and where we fit in that plan and how we are doing in the trip, the journey on that narrow and very difficult road that leads to eternal life. It's a day to rest from our normal work and assemble with others who are being led by the Spirit of God. We're commanded to prepare for the needs that we anticipate may occur on the Sabbath or we know will occur on the Sabbath. And we're to make those preparations the day before, not on the Sabbath. We have to anticipate. We know, well, let's see, I've got to eat, yes. So I need to prepare some food. I'm going to need some clothes to wear when I go to assemble. So I need to make sure that I have my clothes. I'm going to have to drive a ways. I need to make sure that my gas tank has enough fuel, or my fuel tank, whether diesel or gasoline, whatever you have, in order to get to and from the assembly. There are needs that we have. But we need to anticipate that the day before, and so have everything in place. Yet, sometimes circumstances arise that we don't anticipate. And God allows us at those times to take care of those unanticipated needs. All that said, we must be very careful not to rationalize our wants into what we consider our needs. Because needs are not wants. In Isaiah chapter 58. Isaiah 58, verse 13. The New Revised Standard Translation has, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests, that is, your own wants, your own desires, on my holy day, that is the holy time that I've established, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, that is, you made your mind, you're going to do something, and you haven't verified whether it would be in accordance with God's holy time or not. Serving your own interests or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord. If we honor that time, if we respect that time, and if we use that time it's supposed to be used, then we will be calling it a delight. We will see the day as something we long for at the end of the week. Not some, oh man, the Sabbath, I'm not going to be able to watch the game, and it's the last game of the series, and oh man. I mean, with that attitude, kiss the kingdom of God goodbye. If the Sabbath is not a delight for us, we're not in the right place, brethren. God expects His people to be completely selfless, especially during the holy time that He's given them. Every decision should be guided by God's instructions regarding holy time and Christ's example of holy time observance while He was on the earth in the flesh, living 7 days a week, week after week, until the time of His crucifixion and death. Now, since part 1 of the topic of holy time, I've received several questions from individuals asking for some clarification. So I want to quickly go through those in the time remaining. Since you say that assembly on holy time should be structured and the structure should include having an elder to oversee and teach, how is it possible when there's no elder available to attend a small group that meets in a home? First of all, I did not mean to imply that every assembly must be structured. My purpose in the first sermon was in response to those who teach that a structured assembly is wrong. And I wanted to make sure that everybody saw that the Bible does show that there is structure. I believe structure is important. But there are situations, such as the one that the individual mentions here in the question, where a structured assembly would not work as well, or would not work well. You don't have an elder, how do you have someone teach, and so on. But even so, small groups without an elder or teacher physically present can still have a scaled-down structured assembly. They can connect electronically with other groups, small groups even as themselves, and listen to a live message. One reason we have the webcast. There are people who, that's the way they can assemble because they are so remote. They have no other place to go. Or they could use tapes or CDs or DVDs in order to hear or watch a message from an elder, from a teacher. A prayer of thanksgiving would certainly be appropriate in such a meeting. Singing hymns could also be included. Not required, but it could be included. We look at the structured assembly, you have a larger group of people, and sometimes we have groups of maybe 2 or 3 ladies. There are a few areas like that I know of that get together on the Sabbath, and so they hook up to electronically, either the computer or a phone or whatever. Discussion of the truth that's found within the Holy Scriptures should be a major part of our Sabbath assembly, whether an elder is present or not. You don't have to have an elder to discuss the Bible among ourselves. Not necessary. Now, another question. You recently expressed your disapproval of lengthy travel on the Sabbath, yet some of us must travel a long time on the Sabbath in order to assemble with others of like mind. What about those kinds of situations? Traveling in order to assemble is a need. That's not a want, it's a need. Traveling for reasons other than getting to and from assembly should be determined by answering the question, is it a need or is it a want? That simplifies it pretty quick. Is it a need or is it a want? Well, I'm going to go fishing tomorrow, and I've got to catch a boat at Puget Sound, so, I need to get to Seattle by sunset. No, you don't. Okay? No, that's a want. Very clearly, that's a want. That is not a need. Is it okay to watch TV? I already mentioned that. So, again, Sabbath is to be a break from the world. We want to be out of this world. We don't want to be in the world. So, no. In most cases, watching TV, if you want to catch, if there's weather problems or whatever, and you're not sure, well, should I drive? Try to get out today, there's 4 feet of snow outside on my driveway. Should I try to, click, turn on the TV, watch the local weather to see, and you may find that the roads are closed. You can't go anywhere. Think, need or a want. You need to know whether the roads are open or closed or whatever. And then, is it okay to eat out on the Sabbath? Now, this question has been asked as long as I have been in contact with the Church of God. Some believe to do so, that is to go out to a restaurant or somewhere. Some believe that to do so causes other people to work for them, and the fourth commandment will not allow for that arrangement. Others believe that making a purchase on the Sabbath is prohibited by the account here in Nehemiah chapter 13. Nehemiah 13, and beginning in verse 15. I want to read through this. I think we have time. Nehemiah 13, verse 15. In those days, Nehemiah says, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there who brought in all kinds of fish, or brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do, by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath. Okay, so 6th day, the sun is beginning to go down. Before the Sabbath, I commanded the gates, Nehemiah says, who was the governor. I commanded the gates to be shut and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. And I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I'll lay hands on you. Ooh, a threat there. Well, it says from that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. Now, we need to understand some fundamental truths regarding this particular example. We do not live in a world like Nehemiah where we can shut the gates and have no interaction with unbelievers on the Sabbath. We don't live in that kind of an environment today. When we assemble on the Sabbath, or on the holy time of one of the festivals. The majority of us must utilize roadways where toll booths or parking garages are sometimes encountered. You know, you drive, you have to stop, pay a toll. Drive a little ways, pay another toll. Then you got to park in a parking facility. There, it's going to cost you to do that. We use meeting rooms that are rented, which depend on electricity for lights and heating and cooling and so on. There are many unbelievers in the background who provide those particular needs that we have when we assemble together for the worship of God. People are being paid for that work that they do. Now here's where we must understand the meaning of God in the details of the fourth commandment, where He says, "You shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female slave, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates." Now, as we covered earlier, using the term "within your gates," God is simply, what we have here is God was commanding all the Israelites to observe the Sabbath and to make certain that they and every life under their control, whether human or animal, that life had to rest from the normal labor practiced throughout the other 6 days of the week. People who work in the lodging industry, in restaurants, in electrical generating stations, at toll booths and parking garages, traffic light controls, and so on. They're out there all the time. They are not within our gates. You can't make them in our gates. They're not. We have no authority. We have no control over them. And we need to keep that in mind. I believe the decision of dining out on holy time is a personal choice that each person must make based on the direct instructions of Scripture and the principles we've covered today. Is it a need or is it a want? That's all you need to do on any decision is it a need or is it a want? Nobody needs to watch TV to survive. Personally, I don't believe it should be a general practice of eating out when we're close to home, because we should use the day of preparation to prepare for our hunger. That's the reason God gave the day, to prepare. And again, it goes all the way back to the institution of the calendar. God figured so that we wouldn't have holy days that fall on the 6th day of the week. Now, under certain circumstances, such as being away from home to keep the feast, I don't believe it would necessarily be wrong to dine privately with other members. Yes, there are going to be people waiting on the tables and whatever in most cases, but, again, they're not within our gates. People can try their best to define that, but, biblically, within your gates is who you have direct control over. Now, we've customarily had a luncheon on the last great day. And there are people who aren't happy that we have a luncheon on the last great day. Why is that? Well, because you're paying people to serve you and all this. Well, we determine a menu way in advance of what exactly we're going to be eating, and then we give them usually 4 to 5 days notice. They like a week to the number that are going to be dining. Okay? That way they are given way ahead of time the number, the amount of food that they will need to prepare so that they can prepare in advance. That we do. They want to know in advance so they can have everything ready to go. The meal is paid for weeks after the feast. So, well, you're buying. No. Due to regulations and the policy of hotels, we can't go into the kitchen and bring the food out and put it out for everybody. That is not allowable, any more than we can serve ourselves alcohol at certain places, because you've got to have a union bartender to do certain things. But these are employees. They're not within our gates. They're employees of someone else. Again, I hope you understand what I'm saying. We will have a last Great Day luncheon again this year. And again, they already know exactly what's on the menu. They've got the time to have the food prepared, and we'll give them a number, almost a week in advance of when they will have that meal prepared for us. All right, in conclusion, then, in this Laodicean era, which is where we clearly are, we need to carefully examine how we live and why we do the things we do. I believe we have been way too lax in the way we have viewed holy time. This year, at the very beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles, we will have a short message as a reminder of why we make the journey in order to assemble with others at various feast sites. On the last great day, we'll close out the holy time of the 8th day by having a question and answer Bible study that will give everyone the opportunity to involve themselves and discuss the messages that will be presented over the course of the 8-day festival period. All those holy times, as well as all others, we must not forget. We must not forget, brethren, whenever we are keeping these days, this holy time, of what Jesus reminds us in Mark 2:27, that the Sabbath, that holy time, was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath.